Stress in the workplace can play a major role in one's mental health. So let me ask you, how are you advocating for yourself in the workplace? Where do you set and enforce boundaries? What is your relationship like with your coworkers and supervisors? In this episode, we break down these questions to empower you to build a healthy relationship between yourself and the workplace to support your mental health. Welcome to Normalize the Conversation. I'm your host, Francesca Educator, and today I'm joined by Gen Z speaker, educator, community builder, and remote work advocate, Danielle Farage. Danielle, thank you so much for joining me today. I am really excited for our conversation, but before we begin, I want to check in. How are you really?
Loaded question. Well, thanks for having me and for asking. I have had a really tough month. There have been tensions in Israel, and I'm half Israeli, and I'm also Jewish, and my dad's family's from Iraq. So originally, we're not, typical American Jews. And it has been pretty isolating the past few weeks. And honestly, I haven't been able to get much done, but I am, showing up for my community and carving out space and time for myself has been really important, and spending time with people that I love. And actually later on today, I'm going to play volleyball with one of my best friends, and then we're going to hang out and have some dinner. So, it's been hard, but I am trying to find little ways to, make it less bad. Yeah.
I cannot imagine what you're going through, and I'm really happy that you are finding some ways to support yourself through this time, because it can be, it is a lot. So, but it can be a lot. It is a lot. And especially when you're online all the time and you're seeing what's happening, you're seeing the graphic videos, it's a lot on your mental health. So to know that you have that community, that support, that you're doing things is really great.
Yeah. Thank you. How are you?
Thank you for asking. I am doing okay. I've been traveling a lot for school, and I haven't made much time to take care of myself. So I'm learning to start making time to sleep and schedule in some time to be with myself and get offline, get off a plane, and just ground myself in the moment instead of being sleep deprived and overwhelmed all the time. Because I noticed that's been taking a toll on my mental health. But other than that, I'm doing pretty okay.
Good.
Yeah. I'm really excited to talk with you because you have a really great story of supporting your mental health within the workplace. I would love for you to jump in and share your story with us.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you. I feel like one of the biggest reasons I tell this story before I jump into it is I felt like when this whole thing was happening to me, I didn't see enough people talking about the impact of work on your mental health. And this was probably like 3.5, 4 years ago. And when I originally, I went to USC for college. And when I was originally trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, I looked like I always do to my siblings, my two older siblings. And I saw that they were working for larger organizations across different industries. And I also saw that the experiences of work for both of them weren't so great. They weren't happy at work, and work wasn't fueling a sense of purpose for them. And as I saw that within my own siblings, I was like, oh, okay, so I'm going to try my best to avoid that. So I went and I worked first for a nonprofit. And then I worked for a big media company, and I just kind of tried that out as an intern. And then I came back, kind of to myself, and I was like, okay, so I don't want to go and work for some big media company that is just making companies like big companies like McDonald's and trolley, like all these different ones, like more money. Um, I want to work for a company that is making a positive impact on the world. And I realize that culture is a big part of that, right? The companies that we choose dictate often how we're going to feel in the morning when we wake up for work, whether we're going to feel inspired or we're not. And so what I did was I tried my best to find a company that like really represented who I was and what I wanted, the impact I wanted to make on the world, which led me to my senior year interning at a startup. It was very small, female run. And I we were doing impactful work with students. And about a few months in, the pandemic happened. I was still finishing up school in LA. I had to come back home to New York, and I I had to work remotely for a company that was based in California, and I had to work California hours, which was also tough. I was a full-time intern when I graduated, and that's when things kind of started to become toxic, where my boss would kind of keep me after morning meetings and just ask me, hey, can you stick around? And then would kind of point out every single mistake I had made the day before. She would kind of belittle me and say, like, have you ever managed people before? And kind of put me in charge of about 10 interns who had never had an internship and then blamed all of their mistakes on me. And just kind of just broke me down like every chance she got. And this led to me working overtime, feeling burnt out. I barely got dressed in the morning, and to a point of feeling my most depressed, anxious version of me. And I then made a Benjamin Franklin list, which is, if you don't know what that is, it's you list the pros and cons of a specific decision. So in this scenario, it was, the pro of leaving would be my mental health going up, and the con of staying was my mental health going down. And that was actually the moment I realized I needed to leave. And I did. And about 3 weeks later, I ended up at an amazing startup that truly valued not only my growth and my learning and development and diversity and inclusion, but that actually honored mental health. And where I felt super supported by not just my direct boss, but like the entire culture. Most people had like a kid or two. So it was like much more mindful, I think, as an organization. And that was also when I started reading this book called Growth Mindset by Carol Dweck, who a few weeks ago I actually got to meet for the first time in person. And in it, she kind of talks about this, victim mentality versus, taking control of your own life. And I realized then and there, like, I'm the only person who can like tell my story, can share my story with the world. And in order to become like an author or, a storyteller, like all you have to do is really make that first conscious step. And so I began to tell my story of leaving a toxic job on Clubhouse, of all places, if you remember what that is. And then I started to also then share on LinkedIn. And that is really where, honestly, my content journey and my story began, is my decision to like share it with the world, which was honestly a very scary one because there's always a fear of retribution. But yeah, that's the general gist.
Thank you for sharing your journey with us. I think it's so common to be in a toxic workplace environment. A lot of workplaces really don't focus on mental health and put people first. They tend to put profit 1st.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome to capitalism. And it can be really draining. And most people think that that's okay and that they have to suffer through that because that's just part of life. And when we get to a place where we're just going through the motions and our mental health is deteriorating and people are beating down on us, it's so easy to just sit into being the victim, losing our self-confidence and slowly watching our mental health completely deteriorate to a point where we're like, why am I alive anymore? What am I doing? And losing that sense of purpose.
Totally. And I think some of the signs, to your point, that really led ultimately to that decision were, I mean, I was finishing school, so that was also really, really hard. But I noticed just my general disinterest in like any activities outside of work, where because I was working LA hours, which is 12 to 8, I wasn't carving any time for myself. Like I was basically waking up at 11 a.m. and then going to make breakfast and then jumping on my laptop for my first meeting and working until 8 o'clock. And that was not healthy. Um, Another one is just exercising. Like exercise was a huge part of my life at USC in college, and I was not exercising. And although, like, a lot of people were struggling with at home exercising, like I wasn't even getting dressed. I wasn't really going outside much. And I also felt like very lonely. I felt like I didn't have anyone to talk to. I didn't have anyone who had my back. I didn't have a mentor or anything, which, I was talking to someone today who also went to USC, but she's like 20 years older than me. And she was like, that must have been really hard because USC is supposed to be this amazing alumni network. It's like really known for it. And yet I found myself in this position where I was so isolated and so alone that like the person I actually reached out to, or two of the people, were my brother-in-law, who was like around, and then one of the religious leaders, the one of the leaders at Hillel at USC, and then like this other guy I reached out to was one of my family friends. So you could tell like that's such a random assortment of people. But honestly, I just felt like I had no one else to kind of go to about what was happening.
It's really hard when you feel like you don't have that support system of people to talk to or don't know who to talk to or what to say. And to your point of the hours, from 12 to 8, long work hours where you don't have time to really take a break, take care of yourself. You don't have that time to exercise if that's what you want to do. You don't really get that time to socialize unless you're going out 9, 10 p.m. And that can be great in your early 20s, but sustainably going out at 9, 10 p.m. all the time with your friends is not going to always happen. And when you're losing that time from those long hours, it can be really draining, can be really isolating. And I think that's something that's
Mm-hmm.
so common in the workplace. I know in my internship in undergrad, our hours were 9 to 4, yet it was like expected that you stayed later. So you weren't allowed to leave at 4. You really shouldn't have leave before 7. I would stay there till 7, 8, 9 p.m. and not have a life outside of that. Unpaid,
Yeah.
by the way, like unpaid from 9 a.m. to like 9 p.m. every day, thinking that's normal. I was answering emails at 1
Wild.
a.m. thinking like this is just what working is. And by the time I finished my summer internship, I was like, I never want a corporate job. I never want a 9 to 5 because it's not 9 to 5. You don't
Yeah.
get time for friends. You don't get time to exercise. You don't get time to take a break. It's not anything about you. It's all about production for other people. And
Yeah.
that was really, really hard for me because coming out of college, there was all this time to take care of yourself, to be there with yourself, to have friends. And it was like this complete 180 of suddenly you're on your own.
Totally. Like I think the transition from college to career is so hard. And I honestly think that the transition like is still happening for me. I don't feel like it ever ended. What's interesting is most recently I worked for a company that was like based in Europe, and they have they have very different mentalities and cultures when it comes to work, to the point of in France, it's literally illegal for your boss to contact you at all about work. It's illegal for coworkers to even talk about work on the weekends. And that shapes the culture of living, right? Another example is they have, in the States, you have 30 minutes off, like lunch break or whatever, for every 4 hours that you work. And most people in the States, like, I mean, desk jobs, you usually eat at your desk. Like, it's not, common for people to eat out. And in France, their law is for every 4 hours you work, you get 1 hour off. And so everyone jokes that, the French don't do any work, but realistically what happens is instead of eating at their desks or, not eating at all, they actually go to a restaurant and they, go to these brasseries and they just enjoy each other. And, anyone who visits Paris and goes to one of these restaurants at like 1, 2 p.m. will see people just kind of sitting around and like enjoying each other. And I experienced that firsthand. I got to go to Paris a few times. And one of the most interesting questions I ever asked my bosses was, where are your friends from? Like, where did you meet your best friends? And for most of their friends and themselves, they said at work. Versus if I asked that question to my former bosses here, a lot of them would say not at work, anywhere else but work, which I think is also super interesting. But yeah, I think, the fact is that a lot of countries outside the US have always had harsher boundaries around work. And I think that specifically the younger generation, as we've come into the workplace, we're realizing, and like we're also prompting other people to question things. And not only to question them, but then to also take action. And I realized that the only action we really have, or the only power we have, is like over ourselves, right? We can't force anyone else to do anything. And so I think the most productive thing is for each of us to have conversations with each other, with our bosses, with our coworkers about, well, why do we do this specific thing? Why do we stay, to your point, 3 hours more, 3 hours longer than, what typically we talk about, right? Like, what do those 3 hours actually mean and what do they do for us? And so I've advised some people on like, how do you have conversations with your bosses to get more flexibility in the ways that you work, or the hours that you're allowed to work?
It's so important that we have conversations, and I think that a lot of people are afraid to have those conversations because you don't know what to say. And can I challenge the boss? Can I bring this up? Is it my place to have an opinion? Will they listen to me? Will they fire me for bringing it up? And it can be really difficult to even get that courage to start the conversation and then to know how to say it in a way where the person receiving in the information doesn't feel attacked, because people tend to go on the defense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right away, we tend to react on the defense. And if that happens, then we tend to shut down and say, never mind, let's table this conversation for another time. And it often isn't held. So how do you even, I guess, get that courage to start the conversation, and how do you start it?
Yeah, such a good question. So going back to like my story, I think that whenever I go to like a job interview, or I'm like thinking about applying to a job, or, just even having an informational interview, I am always thinking about, what are my boundaries? What are my non-negotiables, right? If I were to go to a company, let's say, they are doing great work, and, it's a passion forward, kind of social impact focused company, and it's all great and the salary position's great, but they won't let me take off for Jewish holidays. Well, then that's a problem, because I'm Jewish and I need that time to be with my family. And if I don't have that time, then I'm going to be really upset and resentful, and I'm not going to be a good employee. Right. And so that's an example of a non-negotiable. Another one could be, I don't do great work in the middle of the workday. I don't do great work between probably the hours of like 10 and 1. I don't. And I tend to work better at night. Like, I just do. And I have no problem hopping on from like 9 to 11 p.m. right? And I think the same goes for a lot of caretakers, right? I know you yourself, you take care of your grandparents, and that's incredible. And I actually think that a lot of the time workplaces overlook the role of caretaking in people's lives. And so that's why I'm a huge proponent of, defining what your best working hours are for yourself and coming to the table when you're in a job interview or you're trying to understand a culture to say, hey, this is what I need. And if you can respect that, then that's great. For some parents, it's I need time to pick up my kids from school and so on. So first and foremost, I think it's about looking within yourself and asking those questions of what are my non-negotiables? What are the things that are really important to me to protect not only my mental health, but really all aspects of health, right? Your social health, your emotional and whatever other types of health you're really in, physical health, right? So I think that's the first thing. And I think the second step that I would say is tap into your why, right? Like I personally, I'm so outspoken and I use my voice because I want that person who might be in the same shoes. They might have, they might be in a toxic job. They might not know how to start a conversation or advocate for themselves. I don't want them to be alone. And I don't want them to feel like they have to stay, right? That fear of retribution, whatever type of fear it is to stay, I don't want them to feel that way. And so I tell my story of leaving and taking my power back because that's like what I have to contribute, right? Like that's my special, unique story that I'm able to share with the world and make it a better place. And I would urge people to, just think like, oh, does a company want to hire someone who's there to just do the job? Or does the company want to hire someone who's there to do the job and also has something important to say and has something unique about them to express? And I would argue that it's really the latter, right? And it's not all the time going to be that way, but would you even want to work for a company that didn't want to hire you because of your personal story and the fact that you have something interesting about you, right? So going back to my own story, it's like I use the fact that I've been through toxicity, the fact that I've become an advocate for my generation to inspire us to speak out and be confident in who we are and bring that to the table in order to truly be seen and be not just a culture, a culture like fit, but a culture ad. And so that's like kind of the first two steps. But I will say it's really hard. It's really hard. It's not a simple, hey, like this is what I stand for. It's kind of like you have to either like go through something or you really have to tap into like who you are at your very core. And I help people do that. So I help people kind of grow that confidence in themselves and go from this victim mindset and mentality to more of a victor, right? Like, how do you take your power back?
I love those two steps, the non-negotiables and your why, because people don't realize you can ask for what you need. You can ask for what you need. If you need time off to be able to take your parent or your child or your loved one, your friend, whoever it is, to a doctor appointment, you shouldn't be so afraid to ask for that hour off. And so many people are. My mom, for
Mm-hmm.
example, she gets so stressed anytime my grandma has a doctor appointment that doesn't fall on a time where she is already off of work. And I'm like, your mom has Alzheimer's. And when I'm not around to take her and you are the only options for you to take her, you shouldn't be so afraid of getting in trouble at work when you already have so much fear of my mom's losing her memory, her cognitive abilities declining, and she needs to go to this doctor. She needs to be monitored. She needs care. That should not be overshadowed by this fear of, I need an hour off of work to take my mom to the
Yeah.
doctor. But it's the reality that so many people are afraid to ask for that time to be able to go to a doctor appointment, to be able to pick up a child from school, to be able to do small things that they need to do for themselves. Unfortunately, doctors, banks, all of these things are open during work hours. We have to be at work.
Yeah.
So if we
Yeah.
need to be able to do those things too, it's really great that you can have a conversation and you can say, look, I value my work. I will get my work done, but I also need to be able to take my mom to the doctor every other week. Need an hour off.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be
Exactly.
a end of the world, I'm gonna get fired, like paralyzing fear every week.
Yeah, and to that point, it's even something as small as like I probably need to take an extra walk, you know?
Yeah.
I remember speaking to my friends during the pandemic, but also since, about the fear of like leaving their desk. Like they were working at home, and because there's monitoring tools that companies use, which by the way, I'm not a proponent of, that does not communicate trust to me. But anyway, some of my friends have, work for companies that have that. And they would say like, oh, I'm like literally just afraid to even like leave my computer or, in Slack to show that I'm like not available during the workday because what if someone needs me? And like I can't even go take a walk or go take a lunch break. And I'm like, why? Like let's talk about it, right? And so one of the best ways, honestly, and this could be like a step 3, for people to, get that flexibility and ask for those things is just to start with a question, right? And you can have when you're in a one-on-one with your boss, ideally, is what I would say. But if you want to do it in a team environment, that's also cool if you feel like you're psychologically safe to do that. But I would say, hey, I've noticed that I'm starting to feel kind of sluggish, or my anxiety is building during the workday, and I feel like I could probably benefit from an extra walk. How do you think I should go about doing that? Or when do you think I should schedule that in? Just so that you're aware that like that's happening during the day. And as long as you get your work done, any boss is going to say that's totally fine. And another way you could say that, if it's maybe something harder to communicate about, it's not just a walk, maybe it's a doctor's appointment, or it's caretaking, or whatever the reason is that like you need to step away, or whatever you need to make it, better for you. Personally, for me, I work out sometimes in the middle of the day just so that I can break up the workday. Sometimes I actually change where I'm working from, right? I'll like go to a co-working space in the afternoon because I need that extra energy. And so anyway, my point is to come to the table with a concern and to say, hey, I'm noticing that when I'm not really doing things that require engagement or collaboration, it's better for me to work in a space that's maybe less, more quiet and kind of isolating. Do you feel a similar way? And what do you do to help you focus? Or what do you do, in terms of where you work from? Do you ever, switch up your location? So just asking the question of your boss to see, oh, what would they suggest, right? What's like kosher for them, in order to gauge what you could maybe do, right? Because something that they're ultimately the people that are setting the standard, right? Leaders lead. And so their job as a leader is to basically enable you to do your work best. And so what is going to happen with a good manager? I'm not saying all managers are like this, but a good manager will have a conversation with you and engage in that in a way where it's not about me versus you. It's really about helping the team win. It's really about how can we help each other to help the work get done faster and better and, like higher quality, so that we can all win as a company and like we can all stay employed, right? And so that's like, I think, another helpful tip in terms of how do you navigate that conversation. It's 2 different ways I just laid out, right? It's like coming to the table with exactly like what you think you need. And then the second one is really engaging them and asking them, okay, like, what do you do in this situation?
Leaders lead. I love that. And being able to understand how they respond is reflective of the culture of the company and what they want. If your boss
Exactly.
responds to you as, you don't get to take a break, you cannot go for a walk, you need to be in front of your computer at the desk during the entire workday, you are not to leave. Maybe that's a culture that isn't right for you, and that's okay to recognize that. But if they're willing to have a conversation, willing to listen, it's really great to know that you're allowed to have that conversation. And when they don't respond well, you are allowed to make the decision on whether or not you want to stick with that company and find a space where you feel supported because you matter. Even if you are not the boss, you are not the manager, you matter. How you feel in the company matters. It's not all about production.
100%. And honestly, that's not something that in my first work experience I even knew. I didn't think that I mattered. I didn't think my needs mattered. There was no HR department because it was a very small startup. And so, because I didn't think that I mattered, I didn't value what my body was trying to tell me. And that is a losing battle. That's a losing game. So, what I would say is like, again, like you do matter, your needs matter. The thing I think that people need to be careful of. And recently I was talking to one of my friends who's like also a thought leader in the workplace space, is boundaries are important, but there's two sides to boundaries, right? There's our side, which is like, this is my boundary. But then there's also like someone who's receiving that boundary. And I think a lot of the time, specifically with our generation, we can be really harsh and strict on those boundaries without understanding the implications or being ready and willing to listen to that other side, to that receiving end. So I'll give you an example. Someone who comes to the table with a boundary of, I work 9 to 5. Okay, totally, totally valid. What if you have a client who needs support at 4:45 p.m. and you're like about to get off work and you're like, wow, like I can't wait to leave, right? But you get this call and you're like, oh wow, we will lose this account if like I don't take care of this problem or if I let it wait and simmer until tomorrow. And I think a lot of the time our natural reaction is to be like, all right, well, my boundary is 5 o'clock. So like I better deal with this tomorrow. But realistically, what does that do? That means that puts the company at risk. That puts the account at risk. And so actually I bring this up because recently I was speaking to a group of students at Northwestern and they have internships. And one of them brought up this really interesting thing, which is Gen Z is known for communicating our boundaries in a very strong way and having boundaries. I think that's a great thing. But then she said, but sometimes I feel like, when work takes longer, for the workday, when it takes longer for the workday to end, sometimes I feel guilty because like everyone else is staying and I'm not. And like, do I play into this kind of, I guess I would call it like a stereotype, or do I lean into like the workplace that I'm at? Like, where do I stand? Do I, live up to this Gen Z expectation of like being harsh? And I was like, that's such an interesting question because I think, and this was my answer, like, you ultimately have to listen to your intuition. If you feel like people are staying maybe half an hour longer or like an hour longer, occasionally you should do the same. Like you can do the same, but only if your intuition is saying that that's really the right answer. If you feel like you can add more to the conversation, if you feel like you can learn more from staying a little bit longer, if you feel like productive things are happening, right? But ultimately, it needs to be your choice. It's really about what kind of worker do you want to be? Do you want to be someone who comes to the table and has really strong on harsh boundaries and isn't willing to negotiate with anyone and causing, feathers to ruffle? Or do you want to be someone who has strong boundaries that people know to respect, but also is a team player at the end of the day and wants everyone to win and will stay an extra hour, every so often if that is what the team needs to do collectively in order not just to, make the team work, but like to keep your job, right? Like there's a larger story and game here, which is that your employment is dependent on how you work and how well you do your work, and do you get your stuff done, and are there loose ends or not. So I think that's an important point that I do want to highlight, is like it is important to communicate boundaries for your mental health, but it's also important for your mental health to know that you're doing right by your team and to know that you're doing right by the company that's employing you.
That is a really, really great point to bring up because it's so easy to, like you said, set that boundary. I leave at 5, someone calls 4:45 in a crisis, and you're like, let me wait till tomorrow. And in some cases, it may be something that can wait till tomorrow, but in some cases, it may not be. And it really is important to understand that you can be a team player. You can be a team player and stay that extra half hour, extra hour, get that work done, and it's not disrespecting your boundaries. It's not disrespecting yourself. It's not prioritizing your mental health. It's being a team player. It is valuing the work that you do and valuing the company as well. And those can coexist. You can value the company, value the work production that you do, value the company's goals, and value your mental health and have boundaries at the same time. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And I think with this conversation, it can be so easy to think that they exist separately when it should coexist. And that goes back to what you said about your why and finding a company that values what you value. And that way, when you have to stay that extra hour, you enjoy doing it. You want to do it because you really have that passion and purpose that you're getting to live through with your work.
Totally. Totally. Couldn't have said it better.
It's so important that we recognize it's okay to ask for what you need. It's okay to set boundaries at work. It's okay to be a team player. It's okay to do all of these things that you need to do. You also should recognize your mental health as well and recognize how you're feeling. And when you get to a point where you realize my mental health is starting to go downhill, my mental health is maybe deteriorating, this company may not be the best fit for me. How did you really make that decision? Because I imagine it was not an easy decision to make.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I say to people is if you're not happy in your current role and you're working for like a big company, a lot of the time it could just be like the people you're working with, right? Like the people we work with, not only do we spend time with them, but they really have such an impact on who we are and what we're able to do and our growth, right? And so the first thing that I usually say when like other people come to me and they're like, I don't know what to do, I'm not growing, I'm not happy, one of the first things I say is like, are there other places within the organization that you can go? Are there leaders that you admire that you'd want to go work for? And unfortunately, during the pandemic, a lot of the rotational programs that used to be available in specific companies, they went away. And a lot of rotational programs are only for, MBAs or master's students. And I think that's a real shame, but they still do exist. The reason I bring it up is because rotational programs are so great for dipping your toe into not only different facets of a business, but different leaders within those different facets. And that's really what I think I'm trying to highlight is like your network is your net worth. And if you're able to stay at a company where you're happy generally with the culture, the PTO is great, the benefits are great, it's maybe a name brand you're excited to work for, but you aren't happy with your current boss, I would say the first thing to do is to go and try and look for something internally, because it takes us at least 6 months to really adjust to a new company and a new organization. And honestly, the mental toll that takes itself can be really costly. And so that's what I typically say is like, try to look internally for maybe a different team. Now, as it relates to like my own experience, I think that over the past few years, like my first job, I left because I was really upset and it was just so toxic. And what I'll say about that is ultimately I knew that I was the only person that could help me, right? We're the only people that are going to be able to look out for us, just point blank. And so in taking that action step of writing a Benjamin Franklin list, what I was really doing was asking myself truly, like, am I happy? And if I'm not happy, then why am I not happy? And when I asked that question, it came down to work, right? It wasn't anything else outside of that that really, I mean, beyond what within what I could control, there was nothing else. And so what I'll say is like, it's important to have those check ins with yourself. It's important to ask, at different points within a year, like, what is working, what's not working. And nothing is going to be perfect. Like, I remember someone said this to me, like, at some point in time, like at basically any point in time, something's going to be off. It could be your mental health, your social health, your job, how much money you're making. Like, it could be like, but there's always going to be one thing, your relationships, there's always going to be one thing that's kind of like off. And if that thing is work, then try your best to attack it. Like, don't let it simmer, you know? Um, and then with my second job, the company I was working for was actually acquired. So I knew that things were going to change, and the warning that I saw weren't good. I didn't meet my new boss, for 3 weeks post acquisition. And so they had acqui-hired the people at the company I was working for. So I had a new position, but I didn't talk to my boss for 3 weeks. They sent me cupcakes that I couldn't eat when I had told them I'm allergic to gluten and dairy. I love telling that story because I think it's so funny. They, the CEO was like kind of like this old white guy who just I didn't like my intuition was basically telling me leave. And at the same time, I got a job offer to work at this young startup that was like based in Paris, and it was really cool and exciting. And I took that because I was like, let me just take this leap because it's giving me that travel and that sense of excitement and like this level up that I want. And that ended up being the best decision. And then the third company that I just left, I was actually laid off because of funding. And the difference that I talk about publicly between that first experience of leaving and this last experience of actually being fired and having no control is that I still felt so in control when I was laid off because from the moment I left that last job to today, I have worked on my network and on my mental health and on my positive mindset every single day. And that's truly what let me be and helped me become a thought leader in the space, a voice for the voiceless, a advocate for young professionals having a seat at the table and being able to really create positive change, even if you have not that many years of experience, right? So I don't know if I answered your question, but I definitely tried.
No, you did because, first of all, I love the idea of looking internally. I've never thought about that. So that was really new to me. And it's true, sometimes it's just the immediate people. If you like the culture of the company, but maybe your team that you work with, you don't get along well with, or maybe your direct manager isn't the right fit for you, but you love the company and you feel like the company is a great fit for you. It's okay to look within the company. I did not realize you could do that. So I loved that. And then also being able to recognize sometimes you do have to leave the company, like you said, when they acquired the company and you never even met the boss. They didn't prioritize that connection. That's okay then to also say, you know what? This company is not the fit for me. So you can have it both ways. It can be the right fit and you look internally, or it cannot be the right fit and you look somewhere else. Both are valid and both are important. And just knowing that you matter as a person and how you feel matters. And going back to the way beginning when you said, at first, your first job, you didn't realize that you mattered. That's how I felt too in my first internship. I thought it was all about everyone else. And I was just an intern. I was an unpaid intern. So I really didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. But I did because I was doing work that helped the company. Thus, I mattered. And I just mattered for existing, first of all. Let's go back. Because you exist. Because you exist, you matter, number one. Number two, you matter in a company when you are part of that company. And you should feel prioritized to yourself and to the people around you. And if you don't, and it's impacting your mental health, it's okay to make that change. Danielle, you have been absolutely incredible. As we wrap up, what is one piece of advice you could offer someone who's maybe getting ready for their first job and not sure how to find the right one for them?
That's such a good question. One piece of advice. Yeah, I think my one piece of advice for people looking to find the right company for them is honestly come to the table with like hard questions. So if a company on their careers page talks about valuing diversity and inclusion, right? Don't be afraid. Actually, it's even better if you have questions. First of all, I've talked to several recruiters throughout my time, and all of them say if someone doesn't have questions, that's a red flag. So that's the first thing. And there's no excuse because I'm going to give you one. And so if they value diversity and inclusion, then your question could be, how do you value it? What are some specific programs that you have designed to improve diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? And so my point is like asking for specific examples is not only going to give you insights as to, well, does this company actually value this thing that they say? And then communicate to you that like, oh, okay, like if that thing resonates with you, then that's a good sign. But it also then again communicates to the company that like you've looked at their careers page, you know what values they value or say they value. Secondly, you're a critical thinker, so you're able to question and, oh, like what's a question that could lead me to understanding what that actual value looks like in practice. And third, that you're not afraid to ask hard questions, which is exactly what people look for in when they're hiring. So I think that would be one is like, don't be afraid to come to the table with like hard questions, because realistically, it's only going to give you more insight as to whether or not this is a good place for you.
Thank you so much for listening to Normalize the Conversation. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. This podcast is an initiative of Inspiring My Generation, focusing on normalizing the conversation, bringing education and awareness to the forefront, and amplifying global voices to spark change and hope. Inspiring My Generation is a 501c3 nonprofit organization on a mission towards suicide prevention through awareness, conversation, education, and support. Connect with us on Instagram at Inspiring My Generation and visit our website inspiringmygeneration.org to learn more about our work and how you can make a difference.